Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm just gonna pop on and do part 3 of ghost stories. Or paranormal experiences. There were 2 huge ones that I left out that I was like, once I remembered, I'm like, oh shit, I want to come on here and share. So this is kind of for me just to be able to archive some of my own experiences. And yeah, it's a little indulgent, but I really enjoy sharing this. One of my friends messaged me. She said, have a ton of people been messaging you about ghost stories yet? And I'm like, actually no. But I think that's because I took the reactions off my stories because I got sick of clicking on messages where somebody just did heart eyes. And I felt like I was spending so many minutes of my life just trying to click fucking messages just so I didn't have it clogging up my inbox. So that's why I did that. But I would love to hear your guys' stories in the comments, but sometimes it's hard to tell an entire story in a comment. So any hooters. Okay, so the 2 experiences I want to talk about. Can't believe I forgot these. Seriously, still. So the first one was a partial out-of-body experience that I had when I was 16. And the other was, well, I think I was actually 14. I was younger because that was before I moved to Fort Wayne. Yeah, so I think I was 14, which makes sense because a lot of, children and then also teenagers, when there's that pituitary hormonal shift, there's an increase in psychic abilities or a revival of that energy. So a lot of preteens are very psychic or go through a witchy or a, some kind of phase like that. So I was into that stuff at the time. And I was reading a book that was giving me a process for how to do an OBE. And I don't exactly remember what the process was, but basically what happened. So it was at night. I did this process, whatever it was, and it worked because I sat up out of my body and I was halfway out of my body. And when you do out-of-body experiences and you travel, everything responds to thought. So if you have the thought downstairs, your consciousness will move downstairs. If you have the thought, once you get really advanced, Grand Central Park, your consciousness will go to that location because it responds to the thought. So I wanted to get my legs out so that I could go downstairs. I knew my dad was down there. I should say, though, that when I sat up out of my body, I could see these shadow type beings, which actually quite a few people have described. They didn't notice me. It was like I could just see the astral overlay. I could see the bedroom, and then I could see an astral or dimensional layer that was literally in the room that I was in. And this is another one of those experiences that helped me to integrate the concept of the Russian nesting doll and the concept of everything kind of all happening on top of each other at the same time. All these dimensional layers are really at an ultimate level kind of sharing the same space. And so yeah, I saw these shadow type figures. They had on black hats and you couldn't really see their face, but it was so I sat up, I was facing, if I'm facing you, and they were walking in front of my bed in this astral plane. And as I had the thought, I want to go downstairs, I heard very clearly, if you leave your body, something very bad is going to happen to your mother. And I immediately thought body, and I snapped back. And when I snapped back, I went, right, because it's for people that are well versed in out-of-body experiences, it can take hundreds, thousands of times before you figure out how to land the plane. And landing the plane is basically, how do you easily transition that aspect of your consciousness back into the body. So even though the lower half of me was still in, it was like this snapping back, and it was this, and when I popped out, the entire upper half of my body was completely tingling like pins and needles, almost as if, like when your arm falls asleep, but it was the whole upper half of my body, and the lower half of my body felt just normal. And I immediately called my mother, and I was like, oh my God, like I just had this experience. Are you okay? And it took me years to figure out why that happened and why I wasn't able to get out. And I was shown that was actually a guide of mine who at the time was trying to tell me whatever it knew would get me back in my body. And because my mother is like number one in my heart, it knew that was the thing that was going to get me back in the body, and that was going to just jar me, because I truly believe that I was opening myself up to things that I didn't really fully understand, and I didn't have the psychic development, and I didn't have the personal, like my own personal development, my own sense of self-worth, my own healing. Like there was a lot that had to happen for me to even begin to be ready to fully go into that world. So I feel like what that showed me is that that's a part of my template. It's something that I can do in this lifetime. But there are, there are laws to where you might end up, or where you might go, or what might come in if you're not protected and you're not sealed, and you don't know the mechanics of how to stay connected and how to shield your body. You can be opening yourself up to things that really want a body and really want to get in, and would certainly jump on that opportunity of you being not in there to do that. So that's not to incite fear in anyone. I mean, it took me, once I realized also what had happened, I was then very fearful. And I haven't actually been able to get past the vibrational state in the OBE. I can get to that state where the vibrational state is like right before you're about to leave. There's this kind of buzzing feeling, like your whole body is vibrating. And sometimes for me, it gets to the point where I will feel like I am completely flipped upside down, and like I'm spinning, or like I'm like spinning in this like whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And I can hear this like frequency and this vibration coming through my body. But you have to learn how to stabilize the nervous system when that happens, because it can be really exciting, and then you can get like a shot of adrenaline, and that will actually knock you out of that state, right? You have to stay really neutral. You have to stay really calm and stay really centered in your heart in order to even get past that state. So that's something I'd really like to work with more in the coming years and hopefully master, but I realize that I have to have certain foundational things in place. Okay, so that experience was crazy. Now let me go into the partial walk-in. I call it a partial walk-in because when people, I guess I'll define how I'm using that word. Everybody probably just uses that word differently. When you think of a walk-in, you think of a literal other soul or a higher dimensional aspect of that being that literally takes the body and integrates completely. And so it's actually a completely different being. You have that can actually work outside of this time-space dimension, that can work in really, really deep ways. You also have soul braids, which are where I think that's maybe a better description. It was a partial walk-in because there was a period of time, there were several hours where I actually was not there. I was observing what was happening, almost as if I was in a chair seated like back here. But it was a walk-in the sense that it was a higher dimensional aspect of myself that spontaneously took my body. My mother was there. I've told this story on Patreon. So if any of you guys were ever subscribed to my Patreon, I think I told this story there. So there was cannabis involved. I wasn't completely sober, but I wasn't like blitzed out of my mind, and I wasn't drunk or anything like that. So what happened was, we were living with my grandparents at the time in Fort Wayne in a trailer park, honey. Me partially living my best ratchet life. Anyways, so we were smoking a joint, but my mom and I were smoking a joint in the garage. My mom was a relatively permissive parent. And I think that looking back, she regrets some of the things that she exposed me to at a very young age, and also the things that she allowed me to do at a very young age with very, sometimes not the best structure. So we were smoking a joint in the garage. We come in, and at some point there was kind of a transition, but at some point, from her point of view, she was kind of just like tuning me out a little bit. I was speaking in the background, like I was speaking, and she said she wasn't really listening to what I was saying. And then she started to really listen, and there was this whole like fucking portal that opened up. And I'm telling you guys that was hands down like one of the craziest experiences, because like I said, I remember most of what was said, but it didn't feel like it was coming from me. But it didn't feel malevolent, and it didn't feel like I was being possessed. The way that my mom described it was as if she was speaking to a much older and wiser version of myself. The words that I was using were not words that I used at that time. The things that I was speaking about was not necessarily wisdom that my human 16-year-old self had. I mean, I was quoting the Bible, and I was quoting the Quran. I've certainly never read the Quran, and I could not tell you a single Bible verse if my life depended on it. Well, he will do greater works on, I could probably come up with one, okay, if my life depended on it, but I'm just saying, whatever the fuck I was saying, my human self did not know. And she started asking me questions about heaven and about hell. And I was describing to her, the Russian nesting doll. I described to her, I was crying, I was weeping when she was asking me about hell. And I said, you don't understand, or this aspect of me said, you don't understand. It's not just like this place of fiery, burning, pits. It's emotional. It's psychological. It's spiritual. It's a torture, and it's an emotional density that lives here. Like we can feel it, we can access it here, it's everywhere. And I was so tapped into that and so emotional. And then, I was speaking about heaven, and I think what I was really weaving out were, the dimensional realms and the spheres where a lot of that dark energy has accumulated, that shadow energy, that fallen energy, and then the higher planes, and the coherence and the beauty and the harmonics that are there, and in such a stark contrast to the literal torture and pain that's involved in those lower densities. And so one of the other things is that were pretty significant, the table. I remember the table in the room. I could literally see both my mother and this table and some of the objects, I could see that it was energy. It was just vibrating. And I was like, you see that table? I'm only re-quoting this because this is exactly what she told me, because she's told me this story back. But I said, that is not really a table. I said, you call it a table, but it's energy, it's consciousness, it's living, it's a form, it's actually living consciousness that's in that particular form, having that experience and serving humanity in a specific way. And it was just such a, I could literally see the fabric of the particles that were making up that table, and the thought, the intention, and the quality of the energy behind that manifestation, and the pre-form, the pre-matter that was all one with the matter, like its own energetic signature. And then when I looked at her body, I could see completely through her body, as if I had physical X-ray vision with my physical eyes. Not even in my mind's eye. I have a pretty tapped this. I can see auric fields of objects and people. I work mostly as a physical empath and with clairvoyance and some clairaudience and clairsentience and claircognizance. But this was a whole other thing. This was physical vision, X-ray fucking vision, and energetic vision. And I could see into her hip sockets, and I could see that there was fluid in one of her hips, and I could see this black mass of energy under her left, would have been under her right arm, left standing in front of me. This black ball, and I was like, oh my God. I was like, this is where you're storing all of your emotional energy. It's like this. Well, she actually developed bursitis in this shoulder, and I was like, that calcification, which is really what bursitis is, I believe it's like these kind of hard nodules or something. I'm not entirely sure, but either way, that energy was directly linked to the physical manifestation in her body. She'd also had hip issues. And so that night was crazy. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. Oh yeah, I was referring to my body as a carcass, which is a very weird, like even now, I feel like I would mean body, carcass kind of sounds like a dead thing. So it was very interesting. So saying her carcass. And also this aspect of myself was warning about my fascination with taking photos of myself. At that time, it was like, yeah, we don't really love that. So maybe there was kind of a warning about, I don't know, being too indulgent in that way, or that one still hasn't fully come all the way through for me. But yeah, those are the two experiences. And I guess the last thing I want to say about that, and just to go back to the whole soul braid versus walk-in, the one time, because I had so many questions about that for so long. The one time that I did ayahuasca in 2018, I asked ayahuasca, it is a her, about this experience, and I said, was that real? Like, what the fuck was that? And she was like, that was absolutely real. That was absolutely a higher aspect of yourself. And my feeling is that that consciousness was braided in and continues to be braided in and will continue to be braided in throughout my entire lifetime as a part of this initiation. And it's very possible that this is actually much larger than just one aspect of myself, that, we all have many, many aspects of ourselves that we're braiding in. And so that's probably just one. But I can definitely feel the quality of that energy. And it's something that I kind of reflect on and think about to this day. So yeah, that's all I have, guys. I hope you enjoyed Ghost Stories number 3. And that's all for now. And Have a good rest of your evening.